So yeah, that's my confession.
Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else want to speak? How about you, Zoe?
Okay, yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Zoe.
Hi, Zoe.
And I have something to confess. Until today, I had never played GORF. Look, I'm not proud of this, okay? It's not something I'm going to put on my CV, but it's the truth. GORF is just not something I ever got round to playing. But it's a classic. That may be so, but here's the thing. It has a stupid name. I'd never seen an arcade of it. And there weren't many home computer ports, certainly not for systems that I knew. And as a result, I've just got no nostalgic connection to it. Nobody you knew had an Atari? Or a Commodore? Or a BBC? Grief, no. Atari's before my time. How old do you think I am? And when a friend finally pulled one out of his dad's attic and we got to see one, the only game I ever played on it was Combat. The Commodore and BBC computers were way too expensive for anyone that I knew to have had one. We all had Spectrums, or Amstrads in my case, because my parents didn't want me hogging the television all the time. The first time I saw Commodore 64 in the flesh, I was 10 years old.
Okay, fair enough. So what did you think of GORF when you finally decided to give it a try as a fully grown adult who's had access to classic games via emulator for over 20 years?
I'm sensing a bit of judgment in your tone here.
You're supposed to.
Well, it's pretty good, I suppose. I mean, it's a bit generic, but what it does well, and I will respect it for the things I did bring to the industry. It was the first game to feature multiple levels, and the first to use what are essentially mini-games as different levels in order to tell a story. You begin in Earth's atmosphere with a modified version of Space Invaders. The GORF fleet is attempting to penetrate the Earth's defensive shield, and you've got to shoot them all down. When that's done, you leave the atmosphere, which is presented in-game as the blue background sliding down the screen, and you take the battle to the GORF fleet in space. Here, it's a highly modified form of Galaxians, where some of the ships fire lasers. My advice? Kill those first. It makes the level so much easier. Then you play a cut-down version of Galaxians itself, which is the second of the straight-up rip-off levels. The original game is superior and certainly more difficult to play, but this level isn't too bad, so we can let it go and move on. Next, you have to destroy wave upon wave of rotating enemies in a cut-down knockoff of Tempest or games similar to Tempest. This is either the easiest level in the game or the worst, depending on how quickly you work out that staying in the middle of the screen and just firing rapidly will kill most of the enemies. The final level sees you square off against the enemy mothership, which has its own protective shield. Blast a couple of holes in that and then blow that ship to pieces to secure your victory. It's a simple level, but it's also one of the best. Then the game repeats on a slightly higher difficulty level, and you just keep going until you eventually run out of lives. And that's GORF. It's not exactly something to write home about, is it? It's a bit generic, rips off a few things, but I'll give it its due where due is due. I can see why it became kind of a classic, and I do like its multi-level approach because of what came after it. But as a game itself, I can take it or leave it. I really can.
I'm surprised about that. What with it originally being a Star Trek tie-in game? I know you like Star Trek. You hardly shut up about it at most meetings.
Yeah, but let's be honest. There's not much Star Trek left in this game, is there? I can't see much of it, because the license was dropped fairly early in development.
The ship still looks like the Enterprise.
No, it doesn't. I've seen that theory many times. It's been thrown around year after year. But let's be honest. The ship in GORF is the ship from Galaxians with the serial numbers sanded off.
It's still the Enterprise.
Only because so many ships in arcade games from the time looked like the Enterprise, including the ship from Galaxians. But still, okay, we can accept that, and it would go a long way to explaining why so much of this game is derivative. Because let's face it, guys, so many games that had an official license tie-in were derivative of other, better games. That's true, but since we're on the subject, what do you think about the home computer versions? I've never tried them either. Shall we start with the Atari? The first thing you notice about the Atari port is how well it plays. The controls are smooth and the gameplay is perfectly replicated. This is a delight to play, and I can honestly see myself tracking a copy of this version down when I eventually add an Atari 2600 to my collection.
You don't have an Atari in your collection?
Not yet, no. I'm waiting for the right one to come along at the right price. But I thought you were a collector. How can you be a collector without an Atari? Very easily. Do you want to hear about this game or not? Yes, please. Okay then. The second thing you notice about the Atari port is that it's lacking the Galaxians level. Atari the company had the exclusive rights to Galaxians on home consoles and computers, so getting a copy of that level into a home port of GORF just wasn't going to happen. As a result, there are only 4 levels in this game before the game loops around. It's not a deal breaker if you're looking for a copy of this game to actually play at home, but it is worth noting, especially if the Galaxians level is your favourite, because it's not there. For the most part, the game is replicated very well on Atari's limited console. The graphics look decent for the time, the sound is superb. I mean, the 2600 does space battle noises and explosions really well after all, and it is a very fun game to play. The only major downside to this version is the fact that the mothership doesn't have a force field around it, which makes killing it far too easy. Instead, it has 2 small and easily shot down enemy craft. And anyway, the Atari port of this is very good, and I do like it, and I'd recommend if there are fans of Atari who haven't played it, they track a version down. But that said, it's not the best version.
Let's talk about the Commodore 64 port.
There were 2 ports of GORF to Commodore's machines, one to the VIC-20, which was cut down in terms of both the missing level and the fact that the game plays in a smaller window on the screen, because the VIC-20 doesn't have a lot of memory, and that's one way to conserve it. The other version is on the Commodore 64, and it is fantastic. The graphics are blocky, as is typical for the C64. It natively looks like someone has taken a 4:3 aspect ratio picture and stretched it to 16:9, and that can be a bit of an off-putting thing at first, but do stick with it, because the gameplay is smooth, like the Atari 2600 version. The graphics are decent enough once you get past the horizontal stretching, and the colours, well, they're pretty nice. The sound is good as well, and everything just feels perfectly suited to the machine. This is a wonderful port. It even has the force field around the mothership. If it wasn't for the lack of the Galaxians level, this would feel like as close to an arcade-perfect port to Commodore's old beige box as you could possibly hope to get. I have never been a big fan of the Commodore 64, I have to admit that. I was an Amstrad fan at first, I saw the Spectrum, hardly ever saw a Commodore, so I don't have the nostalgia that some people do. Having said that, respect where respect is due. The Commodore 64 version is fantastic. It's probably the best version, in fact. But it could have been better, and to see how it could have been better, we've got to take a look at the BBC version. The BBC port does one thing the Commodore missed out on. It gets the graphics right. Okay, they are a hell of a lot smaller than they were in the C64, and that can make the gameplay a little bit more annoying, because you spend a fair amount of time on your playtime wishing you could see what was going on a bit better. But the colours are brilliant, and the designs, well, they're just lovely. The sound is also rather excellent, which is a good thing because the BBC lacks a volume control, so you're going to be hearing these sounds an awful lot whether you want to or not. As with the other ports, the Galaxians level is missing, and so is the force field around the mothership. This seems to be a common occurrence. This means you don't get the same arcade-like experience as you would on the Commodore 64. There's also a reasonable amount of jerkiness on the BBC version that you don't get on the C64, so while this version looks the best, the C64 still pips it in terms of gameplay, and to be fair, that is what's most important. So in the end, the BBC version is great to look at, and it's pretty good to play. The Atari 2600 version is pretty great to play, but not all that good to look at, and the C64 version is the best because it manages to be the closest thing to the arcade original, while also being the most fun to play. That's one of the brilliant things about looking at these old computers, because each one was different. It's not like now where they're essentially all just PCs in boxes. Back then, each computer had its own strengths and weaknesses, and if the programmers were up to snuff, when they made a game and converted it over different systems, they played to each system's strengths, which makes it really good to compare them and see what did what best and how others could have potentially improved it. It's such a shame that we can't stretch GORF out with its comparisons further by looking at the CPC and Spectrum versions, since actually they didn't get official ports. Why was that? Well, that's a story for another day. If you liked today's video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. And an extra special thanks goes out to Chief89 and Tepic. Thank you.